You know, Camp Loll is not the only camp I've ever directed. I directed Camp Treasure Mountain on the west side of the Teton Range up beautiful Teton Canyon. What a gorgeous place. I've also directed Camp Bartlett and Camp Aspen Ridge up Little Bear River. And then for 6 summers, directed Camp Cherry Valley out on Catalina Island. And Catalina Island's where I'd like to talk to you about now. You know, Catalina Island's part of California, but it used to be part of the Spanish Empire. And the Spanish would coast up and down California there. They needed a larder. They needed some place to have food. They rounded up the Native American people off the island and moved them to the mainland. It's a truly tragic story, but not one we'll cover today. And they set to replace them with pigs and goats. In other words, meat that they could eat. Of course, they had to have food for the pigs, and so they planted cherry trees up what's now called Cherry Cove in Cherry Valley. And that's the name of the camp that I directed. They provided the goats to eat the grass and the pigs to eat the cherries and everything else. And then they'd stop in and eat the pigs and the sheep and the goats. Well, years went over, and Catalina Island became part of Mexico, but not for long. In the War of 1848, Mexico ceded to the United States of America all of California, including the Channel Islands, and Catalina went along with that. And not long after that, we had the California Gold Rush, and well, they were even mining for gold out on Catalina Island. In fact, that island is chock full of mine shafts, just like a Swiss cheese is chock full of holes. And Cherry Valley, with all its beautiful cherry trees to feed the pigs, no exception. Then in 1920, the Wrigley family, as in chewing gum, donated Cherry Valley to the Boy Scouts of America. And since 1920, the Boy Scout camp has been there. Now, you could keep Boy Scouts safe from pigs and from goats, but mine shafts are a challenge. Now, there's nothing wrong with a horizontal mine shaft. In fact, we have a horizontal mine shaft in there that's great to explore. You go clear to the back there, 100 yards, shut the door as you go in, turn off the flashlights when you get to the back, and there's dark. I'll tell you, there's dark. But a vertical mine shaft in a Boy Scout can be a disaster. So everything possible to make sure the boys couldn't get in and around those mine shafts was put into play. But there's always a challenge, always a danger, isn't there? Well, as time went on, the Wrigley Company gave over most of the rest of Catalina Island to the Catalina Island Conservancy, which the family still directs, but its purpose was, of course, to preserve the ecology of Catalina Island, which is mostly in the sea around it, but they were concerned about the land too, and they began to consider what animals should and shouldn't go, what non-indigenous species ought to be removed. You might imagine my surprise when I came out to Catalina Island, to Cherry Cove, Cherry Valley, to be the camp director, to find that the mascot was not the whale. It seemed to me that the mascot of an island camp ought to be a whale. I mean, I used to brag that the waterfront at Cherry Valley was so big that Japan was in it. But no, from the beginning it had been a billy goat. And for much of that time, it had been one real big billy goat. I mean, I'm not talking about a mascot you stitch onto the neckerchief or the flag. I mean, this was a billy goat that lived in camp. He was a big billy goat. How many of you know or have seen the Navy goat? Okay, well, I want you to know that our billy goat made the Navy goat look like a nanny. And I mean, big long beard, big black horns curling back, almost a mane, big, strong, powerful leg with fetlocks like you wouldn't know, and a hooves. Oh, my lands. He was a beauty, a masterpiece. But then the Catalina Island Conservancy decided that the goats had to go. They either had to be transported off or destroyed. Well, of course, there was a hullabaloo, and we went all the way to the California State Legislature to defend our billy goat, which was possible because there were quite a few members of the California legislature whose happiest memories of their youth had been spent at Camp Cherry Valley. And so we got a dispensation for our billy goat, a sort of pardon on condition that he would remain a bachelor. Well, we weren't concerned about that, and so life went on. And so at this point, all these stories come together. The cherry trees, the goats, the mine shafts, and the boys. On a day, a couple of those boys were walking down through the cherry grove, and they looked down through the trees and they could see a mine shaft. Something had knocked the cover off of it. It was nothing but a big hole opening straight down up into the earth, one of those vertical dangers. Of course, what do? You got to go up and see how deep it is. They peeped over the edge. There's no way to see the bottom. What do you do when you come to the edge of a bottomless pit? Of course, you throw something in the end so you can see how deep it is. They gathered around a whole big handful of green cherries that had dropped off the trees, and sneaking over to the edge, very carefully tossed that handful of cherries down that mine shaft. Listen, nothing. Well, they looked around. They needed something bigger, and there in the grass was a big rock about the size of your head. Picked that rock up. This one boy walks right up to the edge and dropped that rock right down the middle, and they listened. Nothing. Well, this is just a challenge. They look around, and there, all overgrown with wild cucumber, was a railroad tie. Both those boys got on that railroad tie. They dragged it over. They dragged it over to the end of that mine shaft. They stood it up and pushed it. Boom, boom, boom. Nothing. Just then this big billy goat came, jumped right down that mine shaft. Nothing. And then out of the woods came the voice of our ranger, Bill Hartley. What are you boys doing down there by that mine shaft? To which, of course, they replied, nothing. He says, well, you get away from there. And they said, yes, sir, we're going. He says, by the way, have you seen the camp mascot? The what? Our billy goat. Have you seen the camp billy goat? Well, mister, this boy says in all honesty, a billy goat just jumped down that mine shaft. Bill says, he couldn't have been ours. He was chained to a railroad tie.